Hello, welcome. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. Um, I appreciate that. I'll give people a few more minutes to jump on, and then we'll get started. Thanks everybody for being here. Okay, great. I'm gonna go ahead and get started because I don't want us to be on Zoom all night. Thank you all for being here. Small crowd, which is great because sometimes talking about this is complicated and it's better to do it in small groups. So I appreciate everyone being here. My name is Alex Baca. I'm the DC Policy Director at Greater Washington. I'll talk a little bit more about my organization in a bit, but just so you know, this is being recorded, and it's an updated version of a presentation that I last gave in 2022 about the FY23 budget. This is about the FY25 budget, which will be released imminently. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. It's April 1st, but everything that I'm telling you is super serious. So nothing here is a joke. Um, okay. Hi, thanks for being here. So my organization, Greater Washington, works on land use, housing, and transportation. Most people are familiar with our blog, ggwash.org. This is part of our advocacy in the district, Maryland and Virginia, for more housing and more affordable housing, frequent and reliable transportation, and the fair share of land uses. Obligatory disclaimer that this training is not about getting you to say the same thing as us, not during the budget, not ever. It's about how I look at the mayor's budget when it comes out and how I prepare for the council budget hearings and sharing some of that knowledge with you. So you don't have to agree with us. I am just happy to be able to present. That said, we do have some things that we typically focus on just for your information as attendees. These are the agencies that we typically show up to testify on. Includes DEMPED, which is the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, Office of Planning, Department of Housing and Community Development, District Department of Transportation, WMATA, for hire vehicles. Occasionally we'll touch other agencies if we have time. DPW, which typically does parking enforcement, and DC Health from time to time. So that's reflective of our work on housing, transportation, and land use. These are probably the subjects that I am best asked or best equipped to answer specific questions on. Things like public safety and education are somewhat out of my jurisdiction because that's just not typically what we work on. So just so you know the context. Just as some notes to get you all started. Again, small group, which is great because this is set up as a Zoom call. Keep yourself muted. But if you have a question, feel free to put questions in the chat or just speak up. It's small enough. You know, ask me. If I can answer them, I will. If I can't, I will do my best to track down an answer for you. As stated previously, this is being recorded. We'll post it. I send a follow-up email to attendees, just so you can have the resources. So again, feel free to interject when you have a question and I will do my best. Um, so, oh, and I should say, I don't want to spend too long on this. I plan for about an hour and 15. I don't have plans after this. I'm happy to stick on if you need to ask some questions or if you want to chat with me about anything. But I'm hoping that this presentation won't take too long. I do also want to note that I have text-heavy slides, mostly because we do post this in the future. I want the information to be accessible to people if they don't have time to watch the recording. So thank you for bearing with my text-heavy slides. So who is the budget? Who is the budget for and who touches it? It starts as the mayor's budget. The budget, again, FY25 is not out yet. It will come out on April 3rd. That's next Wednesday. And that is Mayor Muriel Bowser's proposed budget. Then it kind of turns into Council Chairman Phil Mendelson's budget once it's passed, basically, as he's the leader of the legislative branch. But in between, you can think of it as our budget, or at least our budget to have some commentary on. You might testify, you might not. You might watch some hearings, you might not. Maybe you just think about the budget. But fundamentally, there is a process in which the public is engaged in the budget, and a lot of it is done sort of by our elected officials, very representative government. What is the budget? There are a couple of components of the budget. I'll go into this later, but functionally, the two main parts are the Local Budget Act and the Budget Support Act. You'll see these referred to as the Local Budget Act of FY25, the Budget Support Act of FY25. The LBA is the numbers. The BSA is the legislation that supports the numbers. Basically, each subtitle of the BSA could really be its own piece of legislation on its own, but the council kind of takes advantage of the ability to move a bunch of its policy priorities in the budget, because it is, quote unquote, supposed to be necessary for implementation of the BSA. This is a little wonky. This is just something that has become more of a practice in the district in the past, I would say, like decade of doing a lot of policy through the BSA. I won't exactly offer my opinions on whether or not it's good. As an advocate, I can sometimes take advantage of it. It is a place to do things and advance our goals. But it is not exactly, it's adjacent to the numbers part of the budget. So when is the budget? Everyone is wondering about this. The schedule is on the website. It's linked in this. I'll show it to you. But again, April 3rd, next Wednesday, or that's not next Wednesday, Jesus, it's this Wednesday. Everyone is awaiting it. The mayor's budget will come out. The committee of the whole, which is the committee that is made up of every single council member, chaired by the chairman, Phil Mendelson, gets a briefing. It's all day. You can watch it, you can stream it just like any other council hearing. Then there are a series of council budget hearings. They're broken up by agency within committees. Then there's another Cal hearing on various components of the whole package. Then there's markup. Markup is when committees sort of go back and make some revisions and changes. There's a budget work session. This is all occurring throughout May, where the committees work on, what they're supposed to do and where money is supposed to go. At the end of May, the committee of the whole, which is the whole council, again, will hear the LBA and the SBA, which I just talked about. Hear them again. There's a second reading. It's all over when the council votes on the BSA. So it's a substantial process. We have about 70 days to work on the budget in the district. Lots of other jurisdictions have 90 days. So it's a tight time frame, and the budget is out later this year than in previous years, and it's just going to be really compressed. So you can find the budget schedules on the council website. This is basically what it looks like. So these are the notice of proposed hearings. I tend to check this a lot. Again, this is what I do for work, so I need to be looking at this fairly frequently to understand when things are happening and when different departments are having their hearings. But the list of dates that I just showed you basically comes from this top portion, this is about the same, like this is the same process every year, this sort of summary. These are the steps in which the budget is passed by the council after it's transmitted from the mayor. Just the dates tend to change based on when it makes its arrival. Worth noting, if you are someone who is looking to be more involved with what the DC Council is doing, this address, lims.dccouncil.gov/hearings, is a new calendar link. It's hooked into the hearing management system. This is a little bit confusing, but this is basically what the council uses as its calendar. So you can see what's coming out. Here is, as I said, this is that public briefing on the mayor's FY25 proposed budget and financial plan. So that's dates. Also, hello to everyone who just joined us. I apologize for my text-heavy slides. I tend to, as I said to earlier attendees, make sure that they're readable without having to watch a whole presentation. This is set up as a Zoom call, not a webinar, so you are more than welcome to unmute, ask me questions, put them in the chat, and I will try to answer them as we go. Where does the budget happen? It happens in a couple of different places. I keep saying the mayor's proposed budget. That's because it comes from the executive administration, which starts formulating the budget in October and releases it in March. Typically, again, this year it's early April. Agencies each have their own ways of deciding what to prioritize, and I am not an expert on that and can't exactly speak to it. I can tell you that, for example, the way that the Department of Housing and Community Development decides to set up its own budget and propose and pitch things is different than the way the District Department of Transportation does it. All of those sort of filter their way up to the executive administration, and then the mayor's budget comes out, and that is the budget proposal. Then it gets to the council. Again, we sort of reviewed the dates. Hearings begin in late March. A little bit earlier than that, about when the new year starts, council members and their staff typically put together the list of things that they want to fund that the mayor may not fund. They may be guessing, and then revisit that when they actually see the proposed budget. At that point, council staff and committees are starting to reallocate within their own committee agencies to fund as much of what they can. So why do any of this? The budget is what the district does. It is what everything else rests on. You pay taxes to receive services. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't say that we can't run a deficit here because Congress will take over. This is unfair. It would be different if we were a state. It is true that lots of municipalities legally can't run a deficit, but if they do, they don't lose their autonomy to make decisions. In the past, when that's happened, a congressional control board has taken that away from us. So that is very much on my own mind, even though our ideology at GG tends a little bit more towards the progressive end. We do want to see increases in preservation of social services. We do want to see our stuff funded. I am very mindful of the need for fiscal sustainability here. I should say also, your mileage may vary on how you feel that our services are delivered. That is generally a better fit for oversight testimony. Back in January, I held an oversight testimony. I'm happy to share that with you if you need. Budget is really about how much all of it costs and how that goes together. So how does this work? As I mentioned, the council has committees. Each committee oversees a set of agencies, sometimes a couple dozen. I'll take you to the committee list in a second. At a budget hearing, public witnesses can testify. Government witnesses get called. They are typically at the end of the hearing or in a separate hearing to speak about the budget. Typically, they will say that the budget is good for them. That's about standard for two branches of government, right? One is representing the mayor's proposed budget. Council members are asking questions about it. So it's important for council members and their staff to ask questions and go beyond what they may receive in pre-hearing questions, which is a procedure in which committees submit to agencies questions in advance. They answer them. These are pretty standard sort of how many employees you have doing this certain thing or following up on questions on programs. So that's how you sort of have the checks and balances of government try to understand what is happening. When it's time to look at the budget, when it's actually out, there's four pieces of it, or four components, right? I talked about the LBA and the BSA. There is also a federal portion, again, not a state. I don't talk about that too much because it doesn't really have a lot of bearing on what we do. It is there. There's also something called the supplemental, and that's dated for the previous fiscal year. That is when the mayor submits revisions to the current year's budget. You've probably heard a lot about how there's going to be a lot of cuts this year. It's going to be a really tight budget. We don't have as much money as we've had in the past. COVID funding has run out. You may have varying thoughts on commercial property tax revenues. Either way, we have less money than we've had in the past. So cuts can occur, I don't want to say retroactively, but because the fiscal year doesn't start until October, that there may be cuts to the supplemental in order to sort of move through until the FY25 budget starts in October. Yeah. There is a lot of resources on the budget. I like to say that true professionals do this because I have to do the budget for parts of my job, right? It's important for us to participate in that as an advocacy organization in the district. But this is not actually like the whole of what I do. But when the budget is out, it contains sort of navigation sections. It has an executive summary and a how to read section. If you're going to read one thing, if you are curious about how public budgeting works in the district, read the actual budget. The council budget office has a great website. There's a budget lookup tool. It's really interesting. The DC Fiscal Policy Institute publishes fairly extensive budget explainers. These are all linked in the slide deck. But what I tell people to do, in addition to reading the budget itself, is also watch a council hearing. And I suspect that a number of people on this call have already done that, but I try to say as much as possible, if you want to see how it's working, watch a hearing, because then you get to see it at work. The most important part of that sometimes is not just hearing other public witnesses, but hearing how government witnesses explain their agency's work. If you have questions about them, that's something that you can send to your elected officials and ask them to ask. It's a way to publicly participate. This would be easier if the budget were out. When I've done this in the past, I've done this like with the actual budget. So I will simply describe it to you. The budget does live on the CFO's website, which is cfo.dc.gov. There's a link for a DC budget and capital plan. When it's out, that's where it will be. And you can navigate by agency cluster. So agency clusters are the sort of clusters of agencies. They are broken down by deputy mayor. So when you hear like deputy mayor for operations and infrastructure or deputy mayor for planning and economic development, there's agencies under those verticals. So I'm going to skip most of this. This is look at this when it's out, but that is the home of the budget, and I do sort of recommend navigating by cluster since that's how it's broken out by the CFO. This is a little bit of a joke. This is a quote basically to make a joke about numbers. If you feel like you are someone for whom numbers are totally off limits and you can't understand it, I totally get it. I have multiple liberal arts degrees and I really, really avoided doing anything with Excel for my entire life. I have found that I really enjoy looking at the budget, not because there's numbers, because for years they freaked me out, but because there is a lot to read. And there's a lot to understand with the relative value of things. I have learned that it's most important to get the numbers right if you're making the case for funding or defunding something. If you're observing it as, again, a resident and you just want to see what's going on, you don't have to get too hung up on the numbers. It is much more valuable to understand how proportional they are to other numbers. So I hope that's a little bit of an inspiring talk. When you're taking a look at the budget, there's a couple of, I would say, directions for money to go. You'll see different indicators that say increase, decrease, enhance, reduce, or eliminate. Increase means something like the funding for something goes up, decrease, the funding for something goes down. Enhance, a program has been enhanced and that more things in it are funded than there were before. That could be FTEs, that could be capital equipment. We'll get to that in a minute. Reductions means that there's less stuff than was funded before, which means something might still exist, but there are certain components taken out of it. Enhancements and reductions are a little bit more significant than increases and decreases. Those are technical adjustments and tend to be smaller amounts. Elimination means zeroing out a program. We haven't seen too much of that recently. I expect that will happen this year. I don't know to what that will happen to, right? If you have paid attention to some coverage, you've probably heard about the Pay Equity Fund. That is at threat of being zeroed out. We don't know what's going to happen. No one knows what's going to happen, but that is, a sort of conversation that isn't just about cutting, right? Decreasing or reducing something, but actually cutting a program. So I would anticipate that there will be more conversations and more public coverage about that this year. Um, so there's no sort of set qualities that indicate each of these. You kind of have to take a closer look. The mayor will likely say a lot of things are just decreases when they're really reductions. And that is a semantic difference, mostly to, I guess, do some coverage to try and hide how bad some cuts are. So again, this makes a lot more sense when you're actually reading it, but this is the language that you'll be looking for. Um, if I convey one thing to you in this budget training, it is that capital dollars are not the same as operating dollars. The sort of explanation for this that I find very silly, but that I've heard from a lot of people in the DC government is that if you picked up a government building and shook it really hard, everything that fell out would be operating and everything that remained would be capital. You can get way into the semantics of this, but the point still is there that the building is capital, all the stuff in it, the phones, the chairs, the employees, anything else in there, those are all operating. They are totally different things. You know, there are some specifics to this again, right? A capital expenditure, which is anything that acquires or improves a government-owned asset, does have to be over a certain amount, which is $100,000. But fundamentally, you can think of this as buildings or buses or that kind of more intensive actually infrastructure is very, very different than operating dollars, which are basically like people and the things that people need to do their job on a daily basis. Another good sort of example, bus drivers are paid with operating dollars, but the buses they drive are paid for with capital dollars. Capital is typically financed with bonds or other borrowed money. We usually are using just general funds to fund or dedicated revenue, but mostly existing money within the DC budget to fund operating. What this means is that you cannot spend operating dollars on capital projects or vice versa. I had to internalize this lesson. You cannot say that, hey, it seems like we're spending a lot of money on this capital program. Wouldn't it be great if we put it into another program that was more social service and oriented or that really would help people? You can't fund emergency rental assistance with defunding a building, basically. My example here is that maybe you think we're spending too much money on paving streets, but you can't shift that into operating dollars to pay for, say, a universal basic income program or vouchers or name your favorite operating dollar funded program here. You can't switch between the two. That's really, really important. And people won't take you seriously if you are showing up to advocate and saying that. So, I'm always here to help you distinguish between the two. If you need help, if you need to ask me, then that's fine. But this is very, very, very significant for people who work for the DC government. And if you are going to show up and make suggestions, you have to keep this in mind because they are constrained by this. If you need another really tortured metaphor, you can think about Bitcoin versus cash and how they're both currency, but they're not really the same thing. I just say this to say that they're not the same thing. This is the one thing that I hope to get across in any training about the budget. FTEs, you'll see this term a lot. It means full-time equivalent. When you're looking at the budget, you'll see full-time equivalent. It does not mean employee. It is the equivalent of full-time. More than one person can do 40 hours worth of work, right? You might have someone who's working 20 hours, another person who's working 20 hours. Those are part-time, but they are equivalent of an FTE. Agencies are allowed to work that out based on their own budget. But this is sort of where that capital and operating comes back in, right? If someone is working on it, they need to be paid. That funding is funding an FTE that is operating dollars. You can think about this as sort of recombining all of the positions in an agency and then like calculating the sort of total volume of that. That is an FTE count. But don't think of the budget as full-time employees. Think of them as full-time equivalents. Um, Also worth paying attention to one-time versus recurring funding. The budget that gets passed is not just for the upcoming fiscal year, but for the 4-year financial plan. Funding new FTEs or anything meant to persist after the next year needs to be funded with recurring dollars. Those have to account for inflation. Stuff like a study or grants. If you're here for housing and transportation related stuff, we love asking for a study. We love asking for a grant for a program. Those are often one time. And you'll often see sort of language, in the recurring budget that looks really aggressive, like removal of one-time funding. That just means that things were only funded once. So that is again sort of something to be mindful of if you are testifying and asking for something. That these are constraints that DC government employees have to pay attention to when they are budgeting. Another reminder, capital and operating, they're not the same. And you can see this in action in that the financial plan covers 4 years, the capital improvements plan covers 6 years, the CIP is for a longer period of time. It takes a little while to build things sometimes. And capital funds do roll over into subsequent years, but operating dollars do not. And they live in, respectively, the financial and capital improvements plan. Are you testifying? As I said, you don't have to. We're not organizing people around specific asks. Again, I'm always here to help. We are not doing that mostly just because we are just kind of continuing some of the points that we've put pressure on in previous years. We're also a member of the Just Recovery Coalition, which is doing advocacy around the FY25 budget and beyond. And so a lot of our suggestions around revenue raisers, but also cuts are coming through Just Recovery. If you do, I am happy to direct you to my oversight training, where I spend a lot of time sort of talking about how to testify effectively. If you have any questions about that, I am happy to get into it. That's really about it. 30 minutes of me talking, so if anyone has any questions, please go ahead. And if not, that's also okay.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Thanks for the presentation too, by the way. So I know that like I guess it was the mayor's office that was like late. Like how you said
Yeah.
normally like this would happen in March and all that.
Yep.
Do you have like a little extra info around that? I remember saying that it was late, but I don't really get like
Yeah, totally. So we had give me a second, and I will send the link to the post to you. So DCFPI put out, we cross-posted this from FPI about sort of the drama between the mayor and the CFO. So we have an independent chief financial officer. This is a legacy of the control board. And I actually wrote a little bit about that in this post that I will send you momentarily. But other different cities have different structures for the way they handle their financial planning, as it were. But ours is we have 2 branches of government and then independent CFO. The mayor was not planning on replenishing one of our reserve funds. We have a couple of reserve funds that the link that I just dropped in the chat walks you through them. One that is sort of typically it's the main one basically. The mayor was like, I'm not going to fill it and going to transmit the budgets at council. And the CFO pushed back on that and said, you need to do that. There was some sparring about what what breaks the law and what doesn't in terms of like, are you supposed to replenish that fund or not? It was like 140 million, I think. With a tight budget, right? You might want to put that money in the budget and say like, screw the rainy day fund, especially if that's legal. I come down on the side of the mayor here, but the CFO, I think, was pushy enough, and firm enough on this point that the mayor then had to sort of redo her budget to account for replenishing that rainy day fund. Council can undo that actually. And I would not be surprised if that happens. Again, like it's nothing to sneeze at, and I think people will probably want that funding for other stuff. But that sort of back and forth of you know, the mayor wanted to do one thing, the CFO said, no, you have to do another. Um, Protracted this, and it was already kind of down to the wires because of like having to adjust programs in a tight budget year, which we just like haven't had recently between like COVID funding and relatively strong coffers in the past. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, it does. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Cool. Here's another link to my sort of meditation on our appointed CFO. And there's a really, really good explainer from Washington City paper linked in there. Um,
Awesome.
so definitely read that. Um, Dana, I'm going to send you my oversight training. I'm going to put a link in here. This is for everyone. I also have a recap on it on the blog that I will link to. But my quick tips for testifying are mostly use all the time you have, right? You're probably gonna have about 3 minutes as a public witness. You don't have to get super into formalities. You really just have to say your name and who you're representing, if anyone. Um, and depending on what you're trying to get across, you can either be super general or super specific, and that's sort of what this oversight slide deck goes into. Um, but don't try to do everything with your testimony. You can always follow up with the committee afterwards. You can always exchange emails with the committee staff, and sort of keep in touch with them and ask them about how things are going. Let me send you the recap of this also. There you go. I tried to do this sort of funny analogy of like choose your fighter on how to testify that you'll see. But this basically amounts to something you can basically translate all of this into the budget. Sometimes, especially, it is really helpful to say, like, yes, things are working well before you launch into criticism. People rarely hear that. So if there is something that you want maintained, especially this year, you're going to have to say so because otherwise it may be on the chopping block. So typically I have sort of said, look, if you're mad, say you're mad, say you hate it. But if you do want something to stick around, now is definitely the year to make the case for continuing funding for something. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Cool. Any other questions?
I am also curious about some of the um, things that you are planning to advocate for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know if you just want to give like a maybe a quick, I don't know how in depth that is. I don't want to make it.
Yeah, no, totally, totally. I mean, happy to. So DEMPED, which is Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, will be a big one, right? Because I think there's the well, the Capital One Arena funding is going through, right? So like as far as I'm concerned, we have more than exceeded our generic economic development contribution. I won't be too mean about stadium funding at this
Right.
time. So I have over the past few years spent a lot of energy basically on trying to provide a little bit of a counter narrative to let's just do tax abatements for downtown, or let's just provide public money to do stuff. I don't have, I will say this is not as like data backed as I would like, but a question that I continually have is like, is downtown actually our like quote unquote golden goose that pays for the rest of our budget? One of my asks has just been for the DC government to figure that out and do more research on where our tax base is and what funds what we actually do. Last year, I was very opposed to the housing in downtown tax abatement. which did pass. I will probably make some noise about that again this year because that was a sort of funded over multiple years. That's something that you see showing up in that 4-year financial plan. I still don't think that we need to be spending $48 million in FY28 on tax abatements for residential in downtown DC. That's the sort of line of thinking that I try to present to DEMPED while also saying that, we're the organization who's very much advocated for more housing and more density, fewer trips by car, more transit, basically the more city that is very, very economically beneficial to, places like downtown right now. Office of Planning, if you were sort of present for any of our comprehensive plan work, you may know that the comp plan is getting rewritten. It was amended from 2016 to 2021. It's being rewritten. This is less of a budget ask and more of a just ensuring that everything is on track for that rewrite to move forward, that the agency has enough money to do that. OP is also where our housing targets live, basically. The mayor has a plan to build 36,000 new units in DC by 2025, making sure that target is hit, making sure that we have more, a new target coming up since it's almost 2025 is going to be really important. Those trend toward a little bit more towards oversight asks, but they are relevant to OP and just making sure that OP has the budget that it needs, right? Previously, we've asked for more planning, and that's really been more FTEs, right? Like more FTEs, more money to do projects. I will probably not ask for that this year. OP's done a lot of implementation of the comp plan, and now it's just really, do they have the resources to rewrite it? Our big ask always is that the Housing Production Trust Fund is funded at $100 million or more. Mayor Bowser committed to that when she took office. She has, to her word, funded the Housing Production Trust Fund at $100 million or more. The HPTF fund, or HPTF funds the production of income restricted subsidized housing. So that's what we refer to as affordable, as income restricted and subsidized. HPTF is the public subsidy for most of those units.
Is that the one? Sorry, is that the I think I read the article that was talking about where the special bonds, like the low income housing
Yeah,
credit or something.
yeah.
That comes, does that come out of that fund?
No, so
Oh,
the thing that you probably read, was it our piece on it?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that was about the LIHTC bond cap. So that was about low income housing tax credits, which are federal tax credits.
Mhm.
And basically we hit the threshold for those credits.
Right.
This is something that happens in other jurisdictions. The interaction with HPTF is that HPTF is local dollars, LIHTC is federal tax credits.
Got it.
Is that they both, like, it's really, really, really expensive to build affordable housing. Both of those subsidies are often needed to do so. Because we've hit the bond cap, a lot of projects are now figuring out how to just like how to go forward with only HPTF dollars or other sort of like novel sources of funding.
Got
So
it.
even though like the LIHTC bond cap is not like specifically within the district's budget, like HPTF is, and they are so interrelated to actually producing affordable housing that like we're like really screwed if we reduce HPTF, right? So like
Mhm.
that will be my sort of number one, like, is it funded? And also like no one take any money on that out of this. Like it needs to come from the mayor with 100 million and it needs to pass the council with at least 100 million.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah. So that's a big one. Like every year this is sort of my like, don't touch it, put more money in it.
Right.
And I will say to the mayor's credit, a lot of our pandemic recovery dollars went into the trust fund. So there was like a $400 million in there for a couple of years, which was great. We have a pretty strong affordable housing pipeline, but if that isn't maintained, it'll be really challenging to keep that up. DDOT, we want to see more bus lanes, more bike lanes, more safety projects, making sure that things are getting installed to slow drivers down and prevent people from dying. DDOT's budget is one that I am like kind of eagerly awaiting because it feels like I'll have to go through that like line by line to really like decide what is a priority. But I feel fairly confident that the bus priority team will remain funded, and that's a huge deal. Like that's been a huge benefit, I think, in terms of just like the structure of the program and the way that they've rolled out projects. Our other big thing this year is going to be WMATA, which it is my understanding that the mayor has included a revenue raiser in her budget to pay for WMATA. I do not know what it is. This is like driving me crazy. I don't know where that money is coming from, what the source of that is. But the mayor, the council chairman, and Charles Allen, who chairs the Committee on Transportation and the Environment, back in December committed to agreeing to fund an additional 200 million on top of the district's ongoing obligation to Metro. I'm very proud of the district for always leading and funding our regional transit system. Maryland and Virginia, frankly, don't put as much in. And they drag their feet, and we lead on that. And as a transit advocate, that's really, really important to me. That said, I have no idea how they're going to fund it, and I don't want transit to cannibalize other services, basically. So that's a real, like, that's kind of the part that I'm the most anxious about. But we'll support fully funding WMATA, not just this year, not just next year, but looking for long-term solutions for that. And that's going to be, I don't know, the next couple of months of what I'll be talking about.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, totally. And we'll be, I always I say this every year, is like, I want to be writing more about the budget on the blog. And then I sort of get lost in the testimony vortex, but we always post our testimony. And I do try to like put things out either in emails or on the website to sort of talk about what we're doing and what we're saying. And either, if you're interested in this, like, should you show up for it, or like, is this just something to send an email to a committee about? Yeah. Anything else I can help anybody with? If the answer is no, I'm gonna let you all go on your Monday. um, but
Yeah, I'll hop off. Thank you though. It was
yeah,
helpful.
totally. Thanks for being here, Jordan. I appreciate it.
Of course. All right. Bye.
Bye. Um, anyone else need anything?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, go ahead. Wait, Judith, did you have something to say?
To unmute.
Yes, I can hear you. Judith, maybe? I can't unmute you, but you are welcome to drop something in the chat if you need to.
But I don't know what I
I can hear you. No, okay. I think you're back on mute. Judith, I may go ahead and end this because I think we're winding down. If you want to put something in the chat or give me a call, I will just reach out to you via email if that's okay. Um, I hope that's okay. All right. Record fast budget training for me, which is awesome. I hope everyone has a great Monday. My email is abaca@ggwatch.org if you need anything. If you check the site, I'll have a recap up on this and probably by next week, along with more budget content. So thank you all so much for being here. Have a great night, and hopefully I will talk to you soon. Thank you.